Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hello and welcome back to Self-Inflicted Oral Nostalgia, a fans Guided by Voices podcast, taking an in-depth look at every GBV LP. Whenever they release them, I'll probably talk about them. My name is Jeff Gomez, and today I'm looking at Warp and Woof, the 24-track recently released LP that actually debuted as a series of EPs. But before I talk about that, let me say that all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators. And thanks once again to Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database, which you can find at gbvdb.com. Go to the podcast website, everygbvlp.com, to listen to episodes covering every single GBV record, as well as to hear the 5 bonus episodes. Not to mention, you really should check out the 27-track Guided by Voices tribute record called How Do You Spell GBV? And you can find all of that at everygbvlp.com. Go to my website, don'tcallhome.com, to download free records and novels by me, and as usual, you can drop me a line with corrections, suggestions, or thoughts at jeff@everygbvlp.com. Now let's get to the show. Okay, we are back with a new but sort of curious GBV record. It of course follows closely on the heels of their previous LP, double album Zeppelin Over China, which came out less than 3 months ago in early February. And while Bob's released GBV LPs in close succession before, remember that in 2012, 3 Guided by Voices albums were released, a feat that's going to be repeated this year, Warp and Woof is an entirely different beast. First off, Zeppelin was a super polished effort that served up the biggest batch of Pollard songs ever. 32 tracks, clocking in at an hour and 15 minutes. It was also the longest GBV record ever, surpassing the length of the band's previous double album, August by Cake, by 4 minutes. Whereas Warp and Woof features 24 tracks, clocking in at well under 40 minutes. And while almost a third of the songs on Zeppelin pushed past the 3-minute mark, on Warp there's not a single one that's that long. In fact, there's only 2 tracks out of the 24 that's even longer than 2 minutes. It's also different because it's kind of not a new record. All 24 songs were issued as a series of 6-song 7-inches over the course of the past 6 months. The first batch came out in 2018 as 100 Dougs and Wine Cork Stonehenge, while the second and final ones were issued early this year as 1901 Acid Rock and Umlaut Over the Ozone. In a note that Pollard posted to social media in July of 2018, he talked about all of this material then being compiled and resequenced with new artwork to be released on LP and CD as Warp and Woof. The EPs leading up to that album would pay homage, as Bob wrote in that same note, to the format that was so prevalent for GBV in the early/mid-90s. For a long time, this made me consider these EPs in the same light as the older releases Pollard was referencing, sloppy but super fun 7-inches like 1994's Fast Japanese Spin Cycle and Clown Prince of the Menthol Trailer. And even though those EPs contained tracks that were later reworked or provided inspiration for future albums, my impression now appeared first on the former, and song titles Broadcaster House and Scalping the Guru from the latter would provide, temporarily anyway, album titles. GBV's EPs from that era were more or less standalone creations. These cool and idiosyncratic little slabs of vinyl were self-contained musical worlds in the same manner as Pavement's pretty much perfect Watery Domestic EP. And much like how the Beatles and later the Smiths released singles that weren't on their records, GBV's EPs were removed from their other work. The albums were the albums and the EPs were the EPs. So all through fall of last year, I kept thinking of Warp and Woof as a compilation and not a studio record. It was, to use Pavement again as a comparison, the GB version of Westing by Muscat and Sexton. That is to say, Warp and Woof was a collection of tracks which had already been released. It was a compilation and not an original work. And as I stated from the very beginning on this podcast, I was only going to talk about GBV's studio albums. This is why I didn't do episodes on Tonics and Twisted Chasers, Sunfish Holy Breakfast, or King Shit and the Golden Boys, as much as I love some of those releases. The reason for this is that I wanted the podcast to do 2 things. First, I wanted to chart and document the course of the band, GBV's Flappy Bird-like rise and fall, and looking at all of the records seemed like a good way to do that. including the EPs and compilations, not to mention some of Pollard's solo projects, since pretty much all of that stuff happened at the same time of the albums, wouldn't have been pertinent to the story I was trying to tell about the band, namely who they are, where they came from, and what happened to them along the way. And second, I wanted to take a critical look and provide a thorough and sometimes, as Mike Edwards has called this show, forensic look at what I consider to be Pollard's main body of work, GBV's studio albums. Because that's what I think you judge bands by. The same way that I'm a fan of novels over short stories and I love movies but never watch short films, I only really get excited about albums. Why? Because they're immersive, they're statements, and they are, to my mind, the best yardstick we have to measure the critical worth and importance of a band. So when I heard about the EPs and then Warp and Woof, as excited as I was to hear the songs, and I knew that I was going to snap up the vinyl 7 inches like the salivating dog / mindless consumer that I am, I really didn't think I'd be talking about this record, because again, I didn't consider this to be a real record. Instead, it was like Bone to Drag or Odds and Sods. And when you start considering those to be proper LPs, then you might as well start counting greatest hits LPs as real albums too. And as the Doors-loving record store owner declares in an infamous Kids in the Hall sketch, those are just for housewives and little girls. However, when the first 2 EPs arrived last year, they were then being described as teasers for another full-length record by the band. This meant that they were, in fact, not at all like the standalone EPs from GBV's heyday. Instead, Guided by Voices were being a bit Radiohead. They had found a new and interesting way to release a record. By the way, don't completely scoff at me mentioning GBV in the same sentence as Radiohead. Don't forget that Mag Earwig was one of Tom York's favorite records of 1997. So then this struck me as being a pretty cool idea in terms of presenting a record, with the EPs being one thing, having their own cover art and song sequence, and the LP being yet something else. And the more I thought about Pollard and the history of the band, it began to make even more sense. And then something happened to me that really put it into perspective. I got a bunch of boxes out of storage and found a huge mound of my old 4-track cassette tapes from the mid-90s. It was stuff I'd recorded in 1995 and 1996. I'd been in a band, but we'd broken up, and so, in thrall of bedroom acts of the period like Portastatic and Centrido, I was making all these crazy songs in my Los Angeles apartment. And as I was sitting there looking back at all these cassettes, I realized that in just 1 year, in 1996, I made 4 EPs. And I asked myself, why didn't I just make a record? Instead of putting out an EP every 3 months, which had anywhere from 5 to 7 songs, why not just wait a bit and put out the best 10 or 12 tracks onto one LP at the end of the year? Well, the answer I came up with was that EPs were just more fun. Making 4 EPs instead of a single record meant coming up with 4 different covers and more names for tracks. It meant more chances to give them to my friends and get reactions, and all of that was fun to do. I got as much of a kick out of creating little packages for my songs as I did writing the songs. And I think Pollard, from the 80s on through to today, feels very much the same way. He's a guy who loves to make things. He not only has songs coming out of his ears, but he's also a prolific visual artist, and he's a guy who loves to make up phrases and titles. So creating a batch of EPs is a great way to get that fix of creating something, instead of waiting 4 times as long and putting out just an LP. In fact, I'd argue that the long gaps between records for some bands, whether it's Guns N' Roses or My Bloody Valentine, arises less because of some artistic determination towards perfection than it is a dearth of ideas. Well, Pollard's a guy who's never short on ideas, which is why EPs are pretty much the perfect way for him to scratch his artistic itch. And with Warp and Woof, he's sort of playing the game from both sides. Issuing these 24 songs initially as EPs means he gets to design and package 4 7 inches, while then putting the material together again for an LP. It's a pretty brilliant move and idea, even if you're a fan and a collector, it means spending more money to get all this stuff. Another thing that tipped the scale in terms of how I thought about the record and deciding whether or not it should be covered in the podcast is that I listened to it, experiencing as one cohesive scoop, or rather one cohesive experience. And when I did that, a few things immediately hit me. First off, damn, this is a super cool album. It's just a great listen, offering pretty much everything that I like about GBV. It also just felt really important in terms of where it fits into and what it means for GBV's discography. And since the whole point of this podcast is to talk about the various Guided by Voices records and how they fit into Pollard's body of work, I became convinced that not only did Warp and Woof deserve to be considered alongside LPs such as Space Gun and Earthquake Glue, but I also came to believe that it's truly the first record in a long time to capture some of that mojo/lightning in a bottle essence that made B1000 the band's truly towering masterpiece and pinnacle achievement. Because as much as semi-recent records like Let's Go Eat the Factory served up short and ragged songs, that's all they were. They weren't sewn together into any sort of connected or consistent whole. That's actually my rap against Alien Lanes. It's just a bunch of fragments and snippets masquerading as songs, whereas on B1000 the excerpts or bits of music were integrated, chopped, and crossfaded throughout the tracklist. Think of something like the Jimmy Was a Fly bit at the start of Esther's Day. That's what made B1000 a puzzle that formed a picture, where some of those other albums remain just disparate pieces that never really cohere into a whole. In fact, a great way to listen to Warp and Woof is just to put it on and, well, listen, not even trying to judge or even discern one track from another. Usually when I get a new record, I sit down with the sleeve and, if available, the lyrics, and I read and follow along with every song. Now, I know that Jarvis Cocker tells you not to do that, but I don't care. That's what I do. But with Warp and Woof, just stick it on and enjoy it. In fact, you actually can't follow along with the lyrics because there are none. For the first time since English Little League, Bob hasn't included a lyric sheet with the LP. And when you do this, as a whole album, it works really well. And I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record with some of these recent releases, but it's just another truly stellar album. I'm really blown away by it, and I'm really proud of Bob and the guys for taking a left turn away from the more stately and polished sound that began with How Do You Spell Heaven? Warp and Woof gets back to the ragged and rough quality that was the highlight of the lo-fi years, while retaining some of the best examples and impulses of late-period Pollard. Now, that's not to say it's perfect, but it's a really great listen, and the streak that this new classic lineup is currently on is, quite frankly, fucking insane. The reason for the record's raggedness lies in the fact that, unlike the past couple of records which were recorded at producer Travis Harrison's New York studio, much of Warp was recorded during last year's Space Gun tour. This meant that Bob recorded his vocals in hotel rooms and small studios, while the guys recorded their guitars in the back of the tour van. And I don't mean just in the back of the van while they were parked at a Ramada Inn while waiting to play in Winnipeg. I mean in the back of the van as it sped down the highway between gigs. The result is a super laid-back and super catchy record that sounds amazing. It's also pretty much the perfect move for the guys to make after a trio of really polished and accomplished albums. The cover for the record's also really nice, featuring a striking Pollard collage in black and yellow. The yellow is super bright, reminding me of past GBV sleeves like Vampire and Titus and Self-Inflicted Aerial Nostalgia. Of the 24 tracks, Bob wrote all of them except Side 2's It Will Never Be Simple, which was written by Doug Gillard. Another interesting thing about the LP, as opposed to the EPs, is that the sides are named, with Side 1 being the Warp side and Side 2 being the Woof side. But to even add to that, the sides are named parenthetically Cincinnati and Cleveland. For a band so closely identified with Dayton, it's interesting to see Bob reference other Ohio cities like this. In terms of the album's title, while seeming or sounding like the usual bit of Pollard nonsense, Warp and Woof is actually both a real thing and a phrase that gets used a lot. Not that I'd ever heard it before the LP was announced. It derives from weaving and was coined centuries ago. It even makes an appearance in the Bible as part of an Old Testament command to get rid of clothes that have been infected. Here's the passage. Also, if a garment has a leprous plague in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or woof of linen or wool, whether in leather or anything made of leather, and so on. Here's the website dailywritingtips.com on the phrase. Weaving is the process of crossing threads or yarns to create a woven fabric. Picture an old-fashioned loom, a large wooden frame. One set of threads is fastened from top to bottom of the loom. These vertical threads are called the warp. Threads that cross from side to side, over and under the warp, are called the weft, or the woof. Together, the warp and the weft, or woof, are the substance of the web thus created. Pollard's collage for the album, with its series of horizontal yellow and black lines, seems to reference this idea, and yet that's just the woof. He'd need a series of corresponding lines going up and down to act as the warp. In terms of its modern usage as a general phrase, one online dictionary defined it to mean the underlying structure or foundation of something, as in, he foresaw great changes in the warp and woof of the nation's economy. This gives a clue, I think, as to the naming of the two sides, with side 1 being warp and side 2 being woof. Pollard's saying that the songs together form an integral whole, with each one supporting the other in a tapestry of music which, only when listened to side by side, will be complete. The names of the cities may also play a part here too, since Cleveland and Cincinnati are the most northern and southern points of the state, respectively. So perhaps these up and down points are meant to complement the side-to-side images of the album's cover, thus indeed forming the warp and woof of the title. It's all a really interesting idea, and I'd say one of the best GBV album titles in a long time. Now let's look at the record track by track. Side 1 kicks off with Bury the Mouse.
Bury the mouse before Grandma mice gets home now. How can she tell any lights are on every single day around?
There's some ferocious guitar work on this opening track by Doug Gillard. He's shredding left and right, and while his playing is badass, the tone that producer Travis Harrison gets on Gillard's guitar is also phenomenal. Even more astounding is the fact that Gillard played his guitar, to quote press materials for the record, in a van hurtling at 60+ miles per hour. Well, that's pretty cool, and you sort of get the feeling that the mention there of 60+ is to protect the driver, who was probably going much faster than the posted speed limit, but Rockathon would prefer to not actually say how fast. Meanwhile, Pollard's voice is kind of distorted and low in the mix, which suits the song really well. Bob also, in the final moments of the track, references an early GBV record, writing, "Bubbles will bump him around in the same place the fly got smashed." Dating all the way back from 1990, Same Place the Fly Got Smashed was one of the last albums self-released by the band before signing to Scat in 1993. That record is also, in my opinion, the band's first truly classic album. Pollard must really think this song makes a great opener, since it was also the first track on the first side of the 100 Dougs EP. The second song is Angelic Weirdness. This is a nice song that features, for most of the track, just acoustic guitar and some subtle drums. Pollard's voice is again heavily treated, which I actually liked, since pretty much the only thing I didn't like about Zeppelin Over China were Bob's overly sloppy vocals. The song seems to be another one of Pollard's commentaries on religion, a subject he's tackled on dozens of prior GBV tracks. Here he's saying that he's experiencing angelic weirdness because an angel is walking with him. And even though that should, as he sings in the track, comfort him, he can't get over feeling that, well, it's weird. This is another one of the songs that includes the musicians recording their parts in a speeding tour band, with Mark Schu's bass having been tracked while literally on the road. Next up, meet the Foreign Deputies.
It's a life and it's a crime. Tell me how it ends and all.
At just 1 minute and 1 second, this is the album's shortest song. It doesn't have much of a structure, it's just a long verse that doesn't rhyme or seem to make much sense. Pollard starting the track with, "It's a life and it's a crime. Tell me how it ends and all. Did you follow me? Go around me?" This is sung over a really nice electric guitar figure. There's also a recording that appears towards the end of the song. I can't make out the source, although it sounds to me like Tim Allen talking about excrement in a waste paper basket. If so, that'd be a pretty fun reference, since Allen's a fan of Pollard's former bandmate, Tobin Sprout. Apparently, he's a big collector of Toby's photorealist paintings. The next track is Bob's Worst Nightmare, Dead Liquor Store. For the first minute of this 1.5-minute song, it's a straight-ahead stomper, with Pollard singing standard rock and roll lyrics against a driving beat, for example, "When you held my baby, you pushed me right out the door." But then the music's replaced with some really spiky guitars that sound like the main riff to Queens of Cans and Jars, before the song kicks back in and Pollard returns to the sort of scatting that showed up on the track Carapace from Zeppelin Over China. I actually think it's a lot of fun, and it's an effective song. Moving on, we have Mumbling Amends.
We chose the spots to circle of
This song starts, appropriately enough, with a bit of mumbling. When it finally kicks in, it's slower and a bit more jangly than the preceding tracks. In fact, the music here is just gorgeous, especially when, late in the tune, Pollard croons, "My childhood is through." The whole thing is a small gem that sounds really nice. Next up, dig in for Cohesive Scoops.
It takes the sunrise. It takes a lot of cohesive scoops to make it all right. I know the world is the love you do. Tell me what.
Well, this track to me is a flat-out GBV classic. It's just everything you want from the band. It's anthemic, it's fun, it's got a great title, and it's a bit absurd. And while I'd praise the song Space Gun for its 4-minute plus running time, Cohesive Scoops loses absolutely nothing by clocking in at a mere 1 minute and 30 seconds. It's pretty much absolutely perfect and kind of a miracle that it sounds so complete for being so short. Lyrically, the line, "I know the world is the love you do," seems to reference Paul McCartney's ending of, well, The End, where he famously declared, "The love you take is equal to the love you make." Otherwise, the lyrics seem to be about pet ownership, Bob asking, "Tell me what's in the bowl now," and "Hey, did you let the cats in?" The track was played extensively on the 2018 Space Gun tour. I heard them played in San Francisco before it even came out on the 100 Dougs EP, and it sounded just awesome. It's a real testament to how the band's getting better and better. Also, Pollard should never apologize for playing new stuff when the new stuff's as good as this. Next up is Photo Range Within.
Come down to me, within my range, my photo range. It's not so bad.
There's really no other way to describe this track except to say that it's jaunty. The key to the song is Mark Schu's bouncy bass line that's a lot of fun. The overall vibe of the track reminds me of the stomping T-Rex classic, Metal Guru, or as he says, Metal Guru. And once again, the mix is perfect since Bob's vocal is pretty low, allowing Pollard's voice to just be another instrument rather than the main focus. The track's just 1 minute and 14 seconds long, but it really feels like a whole song. And the lightness of it is really welcome. I can't say it sounds like too many other tracks in GBV's catalog, and that makes for some nice variety in the course of the record. Moving on, meet My Dog Surprise.
I'll give you my dog, surprise, I will. I'll make you understand.
From the cats who got mentioned during Cohesive Scoops, we now meet a dog. Who the dog is or what it's doing isn't readily apparent since, without a lyric sheet, I can't make out what Bob's saying. It's also another song where Pollard's voice is low in the mix, and it's another case of that really suiting the song well since Bob's singing is really affected and would probably rub me the wrong way if it was more prominent. There's also a bit of fun when, about halfway through, guitar screeches and yelps seem to mimic the barking of the eponymous dog. The real star of the song is Kevin March, who turns in an amazing performance on the drums. March's drums seem to be the only ones recorded in a proper studio, having been tracked at the same New Jersey studio he's used on the past couple of records. Next up, say hello to the Tiny Apes.
Take them out to sea, living in the homes. Bring them out to me, tiny apes.
So we've had dogs and cats mentioned in the last couple of tracks. Well, we can now add tiny apes to the growing animal menagerie. Pollard writes, take them out to sea, living in their homes. Bring them out to me, tiny apes. It's all a bit absurd, but also a lot of fun. The drums again sound awesome with a gated reverb snare sound that reminds me of Modern Love. And the guitar's doing a bunch of cool stuff, especially at the end. It's a fun track. Side 1 starts to wind down with Blue Jay House.
Shadow came over me, sleek and low. And when it came over me, Carolina said no.
At 2 minutes and 3 seconds, this is the record's second longest song. Musically, it's kind of fun, featuring keyboard stabs that remind me an awful lot of Devo's Big Mess. There's also a nice effect on the drums toward the end that make it sound like they're being run backwards. But the lyrics are a bit boring. For Pollard, who has a mastery of words unparalleled in his contemporaries, to pen lines like, The night was long, the night was black seems a bit lazy. Also, his singing here consists of a method he often employs in place of a real vocal melody, which is just singing high and then singing low and then going back and forth throughout those two registers for most of the song. I don't really enjoy that. Now, when I first saw the title on the album, I was hoping it was going to be a reference to George Harrison's dreamy song Blue Jay Way, which he wrote about people getting lost while trying to find a house he was staying at in the hills of Los Angeles, which was located on a small, hard-to-find street named Blue Jay Way. But I think Pollard's here referencing a bird since he writes, "I saw a blue jay." I should have figured that Pollard, a big John Lennon fan, wouldn't have written an homage to George. And by the way, when I was a messenger in LA in the 90s, I had to deliver a package to Blue Jay Way, and I can attest that it is indeed very tricky to find. Next up, let's go Down the Island.
It's a slow night, it's a stroll night when you come down the island. It's the song
This song is crossfaded with the preceding track, and there's a nice field recording of rain, giving the quiet acoustic song a pastoral feel. As it opens, it actually reminds me an awful lot of That's Good off of Space Gun. In fact, every time I hear it, I think Bob's going to sing What's Inside a Box. Instead, Pollard writes, "It's a slow night, it's a strobe light when you come down the island." The song seems to be about longing and wanting to get back to an idyllic island paradise, Pollard declaring that he wants to speed this motor back to you so that he can be together once again with the subject of his affection. It's a super nice song, and as I've said many times, even though GBV is considered to be a balls-to-the-wall rock band, I really love and appreciate the quieter moments of the group, of which this is a stellar example. Next up is the last song on side 1, Join the Thimble Society. This song has a nice vibe with stop-and-start guitars and a good vocal melody, along with Bob hitting some nice high notes, but like some of the other tracks on the record, it never really gets fleshed out. It sort of stops rather than ends. Pollard seems to acknowledge the push-pull of GBV fandom in the lyrics, writing, "I'm wearing you out." Keeping up with him, he knows, is almost impossible, not to mention is sometimes tiring. And yet he follows this by slyly saying, "I'm pulling you in." Try as we might, we just can't resist his charms, no matter how frustrated by him we might get. Side 2 opens with My Angel.
I think about dancers pounding in my head. I worry about every drop of sweat that's bled. Well, you better know peace and pray become alive. And anyway, it's a street that I won't drive in.
While not quite as catchy as side 1's cohesive scoops, this is another pretty much instant classic. It's just an amazing straight-up rock and roll song that wouldn't have been out of place in the repertoire of any 60s garage rock band. And the same as cohesive scoops, it's another Woof and Woof track that was played extensively on the Space Gun tour. Second song on side 2 is More Reduction Linda.
More reduction,
This song joins other GBV tunes that mention a girl's name in the title, such as Choking Tara and Jane of the Waking Universe. The music here is kind of fun, with a cool guitar riff and a drum beat that's mostly all toms. There's also background noise of what sounds like kids on a playground, and that adds a nice element to the mix. Some harmonies towards the end of the song are also really nice. My main problem with the track is Bob's vocal, which is pretty silly and all over the place. In some parts, it verges on Cash Rivers level absurdity, which is a drag. He's proven time and time again that he's got a great rock voice, so I can only ascribe takes like this to just being lazy. I mean, maybe there's an effect he's going for because he thinks it suits the song, but it really doesn't do much for me as a listener. Moving on, it's Cool Jewels and Aprons. Once again, there's some great guitar work here that really saves this from being yet another relentlessly downstroked song. There's also some fun vocal harmonies that call back to Pollard's love of British invasion pop. I have no idea what the lyrics mean or even what Bob is singing about, other than the name of the song, which he announces at the beginning, and there are some references to Aspen and UFOs. This puts it in sort of the same space as a lot of the songs on Warp and Woof. They're short and pretty simple songs where Pollard's not really looking to say anything heavy or deep. In fact, the genesis of the record was supposedly a half-hour songwriting session that yielded 6 songs. And when you hear a track like Cool Jewels and Aprons, you can believe that he writes 6 of those in 30 minutes. Pollard can be deep and insightful when he wants to be, but that just doesn't seem to be the aim here, and that's sort of okay. The true measure of any record should be whether or not it's fun to listen to, and the album succeeds when looked at through the lens of just being a cool sort of lo-fi indie rock record. Moving on, it's Even next.
I know sometimes I wear on you, then I always find.
This is a song where Pollard's technique of singing high and then low, back and forth, actually works pretty nicely. In fact, this is a good acoustic song with a really nice vibe. The addition of some really subtle but effective synth strings also adds a lot. It's a good track, and I would have loved for it to last longer. Next up is It Will Never Be Simple. This Doug Gillard instrumental, at 2 minutes and 32 seconds, is by far the longest track on the record. And that really tells you how short these songs are, because 2.5 minutes does not a long song make. It's also pretty perverse to have a song with no lyrics be the longest track on the record. That being said, it's actually a really pleasant listen. The instrumental on August by Cake, Chew the Sand, was my least favorite track on that record. And I didn't at all like How Do You Spell Heaven's instrumental, Pearly Gates' Smoke Machine. In fact, the idea of instrumentals on a GBV record still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But this one sounds really nice, and it provides a good interlude between the songs. Moving on, it's The Stars Behind Us.
The stars behind us got me rocking and rolling. I stay up late.
This is one of the more lo-fi tracks on the record, with Pollard's vocal competing with some random background noise. Once again, really great drumming and guitar make the song rise above something you might find on a teenage guitar record, and it ends really nicely with some harmonies and the repeating of the name of the song. Next up is Skull Arrow.
Seize that stroke. Scolero goes me through.
At 1 minute and 4 seconds, this is the second shortest track on the album. It's also one of the more dispensable ones. And to my point about these tracks being lyrically more lightweight than some past GBV songs, in this one Pollard rhymes the song's title, Skull Arrow, with Camaro. Again, we're veering dangerously close to Cash Rivers territory. Bob also writes, 100 monkeys can't be wrong. This harkens back to the August by Cake track, Cheap Buttons, which starts with 10 billion Ringo fans can't be all wrong. Moving on, it's Out of the Blue Race.
Sensation, coloration, talking down around it came out of the blue race.
Pollard does more of a talking thing than singing on this track. It's not really my cup of tea, and when he does sing on the song, he's doing some affected faux metal voice that's just kind of annoying. So this track is one of my least favorite on the record. The album starts to wind down with Coming Back From Now On.
Coming back. Coming back.
This song is pretty fun since it opens in a faux concert setting, with Pollard announcing the track to an adoring crowd. That plus the 1970s power chords make it sound like something off of Frampton Comes Alive. It's a lot of fun. Third to last song is The Pipers, the Vipers, the Snakes.
The pipers, the vipers, the snakes got to reel you down.
With this track, we can add, well, pipers, vipers, and snakes to the birds, apes, cats, and dogs found elsewhere on the record. In fact, Pollard's practically been Dr. Doolittle lately, name-checking everything from kangaroos to worms on recent records. Also continued is the power pop vibe from the previous song. It's a fun track, made most memorable by Doug Gillard's riffs late in the track. Second to last song on the album is Time Remains in Central Position.
Time remains in the central position. It connects on frightening levels.
Bobby Bare Jr. recorded his guitar part for this song in the green room of Baltimore's Auto Bar before a gig last August. Lyrically speaking, it's Pollard in surreal mode, writing, "When your tambourine spins on hyperdrive, the mind creates this nervous condition which binds you into total submission." It's a nice song, although it sort of falls apart towards the end. Pollard's vocals are again a bit rough, especially when he announces, "You don't see how it works." The word works is pronounced so flatly it could slide under a door. And that's frustrating because I think there's a really great song here, which the band could have achieved if they just worked on it a bit more. This brings us to the final track on the album, the appropriately titled End It With Light.
When you build it, the sight will not always be.
This was also the last track on Umlaut Over the Ozone from the second batch of the 4 EPs, so the same as Warp and Woof's opening track, Bury the Mouse, which opened one of the EPs, Bob most likely had his eye on this song all along as being the LP's final one. And just to show how recording for this album happened, on the last track, Bobby Bare Jr. recorded his parts for that track in the green room while the band was playing a show in Maryland, whereas Doug recorded his guitar parts for this track at the same bar except at the sound check. It's a super solid song and a great way to end the record, except it really does feel too brief at just 1 minute and 11 seconds. If it was reworked and expanded a bit, it might also be a classic GBV song like other tracks found on this record like Cohesive Scoops and My Angel, but as it exists here, it feels just like a sketch. Okay, that's it for the show. Go to everygbvlp.com to listen to past episodes of this podcast. Check out my website at don'tcallhome.com for records and novels by me, and go to rockathonrecords.com to pick up Warp and Woof on vinyl or CD. Thanks for listening, and I'll probably see you later this year when the band releases its third record of 2019. It's called Sweating the Plague, and frankly, I'm sweating just thinking about it. Until then, God bless the Monument Club.
On the sexless, the new drunk drivers have hoists